You know, a burst pipe, a leaking roof, a flooded basement, it's a total nightmare scenario for any of us who own a home or property. But what really happens after you make that frantic call for help? Well, in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct the whole professional response to water damage. We're going to peel back the layers to really understand the science, the strategy, and that unseen battle that rages against moisture.
So, how do we get from that initial chaos back to some sense of control? We'll kick things off by looking at how water attacks in the first place. Then we'll really feel the urgency in the race against time. From there, we'll crack open the pro playbook, dive into the actual science of drying, figure out how to navigate the aftermath, and we'll finish up with a solid defense plan to protect your own home.
All right, let's jump in. Section 1, when water attacks. Now, you might think that catastrophic water damage only comes from some huge disaster, right? But the reality is, it often starts with something surprisingly common, something we probably overlook every single day.
And really, the culprits are all around us. Yeah, we think of those dramatic pipe bursts, but it can be something as sneaky as a clogged HVAC line that's just quietly overflowing up in an attic, or, a simple washing machine hose that finally gives out. Even a slow, unnoticed roof leak can set the stage for absolute destruction. And to get a sense of the sheer speed of this disaster, just look at this number: 15 gallons per minute. That is how much water a single little half-inch supply line can dump into your home when it fails. Just think about that for a second. That's enough to turn a room into a small swimming pool before you can even find the shutoff valve.
So that brings us to the most critical phase, the race against time. Because the water you can see, that's just the beginning of the problem. The real enemy and the reason for all the urgency is the secondary damage that starts happening almost immediately.
And where you live plays a huge role in this. I mean, if you're in a dry climate, a small spill might eventually evaporate on its own. But in a hot, humid environment, the air is already totally saturated. It literally can't absorb any more moisture, so the water just sits there and spreads. This high humidity is the perfect breeding ground for what comes next, and it's why professional help is so essential.
And here's why that speed is so critical. The damage just accelerates exponentially. Within just 24 hours, your drywall is acting like a giant sponge, wicking moisture up into the structure of your house. And then you hit that 48-hour mark. That's the magic number, when dormant mold spores, which are always just floating around in the air, find that moisture and wake up. That 2-day window, that's the point of no return.
So the bottom line is this: waiting isn't just about dealing with a bigger mess. Every single hour that passes directly translates to higher costs, more risk to your home structure, and a much more invasive and complicated repair down the line.
So how on earth do professionals stop the clock and start reversing all this damage? Well, let's get into their playbook and see how they bring a very methodical, scientific approach to what looks like a totally chaotic situation.
It's a really disciplined 3-phase attack. Phase 1 is the emergency response and extraction. Get all that standing water out right now. Phase 2 is all about structural drying and monitoring. This is where they go after the invisible enemy, the hidden moisture inside your walls and floors. And finally, you get to Phase 3, restoration and reconstruction. This is where they rebuild everything to make it look like it never even happened.
And this brings us to the most scientific part of the whole process. I mean, how do they know when a wall or a floor that feels dry to the touch is actually dry on the inside? It's not guesswork, that's for sure. It's a science. And this is a question every single property owner needs to understand. Because if moisture gets left behind, trapped inside those building materials, it becomes a ticking time bomb for future mold, rot, and even structural failure, long after the restoration company has packed up and gone home. See, professionals don't just wing it. They followed this really rigorous national standard called the IICRC S500. This protocol dictates everything, from how to assess the moisture to defining the specific, measurable drying goal for every single material in your home. It's basically the official rulebook for getting it right.
And they do it with a science called psychrometrics. Now, it sounds super complicated, but the idea is actually pretty simple. If you control the air, you control the moisture. By using these huge industrial-grade dehumidifiers and powerful air movers, they create super dry air. This thirsty air then acts like a magnet, literally pulling hidden water molecules right out of the wood, the drywall, and the insulation. And this is where the real precision comes in. They aren't just aiming for dry. No, they're aiming for a number. For structural wood, the goal is a very specific moisture content, somewhere between 12 and 15%. They use these special meters to check this every single day, and the equipment does not get turned off until they hit that target. Okay, so once the structure is verifiably dry, you enter the aftermath.
Let's quickly clear up two very important terms you're going to hear, and then we'll touch on that all-important subject of insurance.
You're going to hear these two terms a lot, and it is vital to know the difference. Remediation. Think of that as the emergency phase. It's stopping the bleed, extracting the water, and drying the structure. Restoration, on the other hand, is the rebuild phase, replacing drywall, putting in new floors, painting. Remediation saves the house. Restoration is what makes it feel like a home again.
So what does insurance actually pay for? Well, the main thing to know is that standard policies are designed to cover sudden and accidental events, like a pipe that just bursts out of nowhere. What they typically do not cover is damage from gradual, long-term leaks or just plain neglect. And you have to remember, overland flooding from a storm, that requires a completely separate flood insurance policy.
All right, so now that we've seen the cure, let's finish up by talking about prevention. You can absolutely take proactive steps to create a defense plan and seriously lower your risk of ever having to make that frantic call in the first place.
And the best defense is built on some really simple but powerful actions. Routinely check things like old washing machine hoses. Keep your gutters clean. And probably the most important thing you can do, make sure every single adult in your home knows exactly where the main water shutoff valve is and how to use it. A few minutes of prevention can save you from a complete catastrophe.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. After seeing the insane speed of the damage and the real science behind the fix, is your home truly prepared for a water emergency? Because knowing who to call and what to do in that first critical hour, it isn't just a good idea, it is your single best defense. And now you have the knowledge to build that plan.